Welcome to another episode of Blu-Ray Boutique. I am your co-host, Rosalie Lewis.
And I'm your other co-host, Tim Rosenberger.
And today on the show, we are going back to one of the early directors that we talked about in one of the early episodes of the show, and that is Yasujiro Ozu. So we had watched his movie Good Morning during our children's movies, not necessarily movies for children, but movies about children. And now we're going to be diving into some of his earlier filmography and his silent films. Before we go further into which films we're going to be talking about, Tim, I'm curious, I believe this was your pick. What made you want to dive into Ozu?
Well, I've been kind of into Japanese films lately. Even if I haven't been able to watch a ton of them, I've been kind of in the mood for them and kind of jiving with them. So that was part of the reason. And also just in the, it's probably almost 2 years since we covered Good Morning, and in that time period I've just been kind of more gelling with that film and stuff. I haven't gone back to rewatch it yet or anything, but I've been kind of gelling with that. So I thought it'd be fun to dive more into Ozu, more into what he enjoyed doing and the types of stories he was good at telling. And I don't know, it just seemed we'll get more into what the types of stories Ozu tended to do, especially as you get more into his career and stuff. But with his habit of talking about families and relationships, romantic or familiar or friendships or whatever, it just for some reason seemed appropriate for the beginning of the year. I don't know why, but it just seemed to be a good way to start, maybe because of COVID being what it is and being something that is separating a lot of us, to watch movies that are very much about being together and the conflicts and the positives and negatives of those relationships. It seemed like January was a good time to discuss him.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited for the opportunity because I feel like I've heard his name mentioned so many times by filmmakers I admire, by critics I admire. His movie Tokyo Story is routinely listed among the greatest films of all time, and it's definitely a big blind spot for me. And I also feel like silent movies in general are a blind spot for us culturally. I don't think a lot of people make the effort to necessarily go back and see more than, say, a few Charlie Chaplin movies or, maybe one or two others. But when you think about silent film, I don't know that necessarily you would automatically gravitate towards a foreign film as well if you're, an English language speaker. So I think it's good that we're tackling not one but two kind of homeworky kind of seeming things, and also discovering that maybe they're not so much homework is actually really enjoyable. So it'll be fun to kind of go through his filmography beyond just this episode. Hopefully we get to tackle some more of it in the future and see how it evolves. But we'll talk now about which movies it is that we're going to be covering. So today we're talking about Walk Cheerfully, which came out in 1930, along with another movie released that same year, That Night's Wife, and then in 1931, Tokyo Chorus. So we're talking about all three movies today. It should be mentioned all of them are available through both the Criterion Channel and on disc from Criterion. And Tim will probably jump in here and say which ones are which, because I'm sure that I won't remember which Eclipse series, but I think they're both from an Eclipse series.
We have the first two are from the Eclipse series 42 called Silent Ozu - 3 crime dramas, and then the third one we're going to be talking about is through Eclipse series 10, Silent Ozu 3 family comedies. Just as a reminder for people who, I think we have done at least one Eclipse film in the past on whatever episode that was. Just as a reminder for people, the Eclipse series is something that's outside of Criterion's numbered spine series that they do. And I think the idea behind them is to make them cheaper releases so more people can get them. So there are no special features on them, and there are little to no restoration on them. Or if there is any restoration, it's a lot less extensive. So if you do watch one of these, keep that in mind, especially with the picture quality and stuff like that. It might not be as up to snuff as you're used to seeing with Criterion or some of these other boutique labels.
Thank you for that explanation. So yeah, I was a little bit taken aback by the picture quality at first. I watched it on the Criterion Channel, and at first I thought, oh, there's something wrong with the app or there's something wrong with my TV because it seemed a little shaky at the beginning of Walk Cheerfully. So I restarted everything. I actually reinstalled the app and it was the same. And I was like, oh, no, this is just not restored. So I'm used to the, very fantastic treatment that usually these older films get. And I would love to see, I don't know how much of the original negatives remain, but it would be great to see true restoration happen. But I'm just glad that we get them at all.
Yeah, and I don't know if any the Eclipse movies that Criterion have done, if they've ever released them then individually or in a box set through a restored, numbered thing. I don't know if that's something they've ever done. It would be nice if they did that for these. I think these silent films I think they're the only ones that are done through the Eclipse labels. I think all the other ones are numbered spine ones. So I think all the other ones, even if there are other silents, there's more kind of attention put onto them. So if people are put off by this, I think it's only the 6 films through those 2 Eclipses that would have that issue.
All right, so let's dive right into the first one we're going to be talking about, and that is Walk Cheerfully, which, as I mentioned, came out in 1930 and was directed by Ozu. It was also written by a number of people, actually. Lex Neal, Tadao Ikeda, and Hiroshi Shimizu are credited with the writing on this, and cinematography from Hideo Shigehara. So this movie is pretty easy to follow, and I felt like jumps right into the action. The main character is named Kenji. Kenji is a thief, a gangster kind of type, but he's not super violent. He's more a con artist, right? So he does things like pickpocketing and, sort of small time schemes. He also seems very fond of drinking and the ladies and, all those typical gangster lifestyle things. His name is Kenji the Knife, and he actually has a tattoo of a dagger on the top of his arm right by his wrist. And, he's going along, living his life, hanging out with his gangstery friends. And then he falls in love with a beautiful woman who is more of a good girl, let's just say, than he is. At first, he thinks that she's rich, but he really falls for her more because I think she represents something different than the life he currently has, which is kind of running around, not really having any major commitments and just, going from one play to the next. So he's thinking about whether or not it's worth it to give up his gangster ways to pursue this woman, and she doesn't realize at first that he's a gangster, so there's a whole drama there. But, it was a really interesting combination of rom-com, crime movie, and at times it actually reminded me weirdly of West Side Story, and we'll get to why, but I'm curious what your initial thoughts were on this one.
Well, for this one, I would say that for me, this is barely a crime drama.
Sure.
I think it does lean more towards kind of a melodrama romance or a romantic melodrama with some humorous aspects to it. There's certainly some humorous characters and moments in it. Again, there's not a lot of crime stuff. Again, there's they don't get into big crimes. It's kind of low scale stuff, and they don't really focus much on those things. It's really just more of a setup of where he is in his life and stuff. I will say I feel kind of bad, since I was the one who suggested this, to say I wasn't terribly moved by this one. I think my main issue with it is I think the story Ozu is telling is fine. It is very stock kind of a thing. It's something you've seen many times before from many other countries and many other directors and actors and blah blah blah. But you can take stock stories and make them fresh and new and different and whatever if you put your own spin and flavor on them. My problem was I don't feel like Ozu did that or enough of it. So there was some cute moments in it, but it all was just kind of played out as I had expected. There was nothing terribly different in it for me personally, so I never really got that into it, since it was all kind of, for me, it was all very kind of run-of-the-mill and didn't really stand out as much as I would hope with Ozu.
So for me, I really liked it, but I understand what you're saying. I mean, the stakes are not super high here. These are gangsters that like play golf and hang out at a boxing gym where there's one of my favorite things about this movie, and that's a Clara Bow poster where she's like in a boxing pose. And I had to look it up because I was obsessed with the poster. And it's actually a movie that is now considered to be lost of Clara Bow's, and it was called Rosie the Roughhouser, I believe, which I, of course, am instantly fond of, not just because of the name, but I just think it sounds cool, and supposedly she would, like, you know, win men over by beating them up. So it sounds intriguing and probably more interesting than anything that actually happens in this movie. Nonetheless, I liked that there were little nods to Western culture and Western cinema throughout not only this movie, but the other ones that we watched that we'll talk about. It's interesting because the 1930s, that was definitely a time, I think, of change for a lot of cultures, but, you know, Japanese culture was being opened up more to the West, and definitely Ozu had an obsession with American movies. You know, he would famously like go to the movies very often. Even when he moved away from where the cinema was, he would make long trips into town just so that he could go see movies. So he plays a lot with kind of the tropes that we came to see in American gangster movies, but again, he's doing it in a very playful way. He's almost channeling it through like a Harold Lloyd or a, you know, even a Lubitsch, I would say, a little bit. I feel like there's some kind of capery, silly setups that kind of made me think of early Lubitsch films as well. But yeah, I mean, the stakes here aren't high, but it's kind of a stylish movie. I really enjoyed seeing the woman that plays sort of the femme fatale in this, if you want to call her that. She's the gangster's mole, I guess you could say, played by Satoko Dati, I think is her name. And she almost has like a Louise Brooks kind of haircut. She definitely looks like the typical flapper girl. She dresses fabulously, and she's the one that's trying to kind of break up Kenji from the good girl. And she tells the good girl, hey, you know, he's a gangster. He's lying to you, and you should just look at the tattoo on his arm if you want to know what he's really like. And so she's trying to break the two up because she wants him to stay, I guess, with her and in her group and in her circle. But, you know, I enjoyed seeing kind of the back and forth between these two girls at the office, and just the contrast that is seen not only through their personalities, but their style and the types of things they wore, and, you know, even the little bit of family life that we get to see where the good girl lives with her mom and her little sister, and they like go on picnics and things like that. And then you flash over to the world of the gangsters, and they're hanging out in a, you know, pool hall, and there's a lead gangster who has like a mustache and a little dog that he's petting, very like Dr. Evil style with his cat. And, you know, it's all just like very, like I said, it's low stakes, but it's very stylish and very fun.
Yeah, I will say, like you said, yeah, Ozu was very influenced by American directors, and I think that American films, I think that does seep into what he's doing, at least in these early years. We'll see, I guess, how that changes if and when we cover more of these, especially post-war. But I know you say he does play with stuff a little bit, and one thing I do like, I think of all of the three of these that we're talking about, is I think Ozu is pretty good at avoiding cliche, especially, or at least particularly the annoying ones, or at least the ones I find annoying. Like, there's at one point, the main guy in this, he wants to be with the girl, but she doesn't want him to be involved with the crime stuff anymore, and basically says, I'm not going to be with you if you're going to keep up with this stuff. And so he tries to rehabilitate himself and get an honest job and all that stuff. And he does find one, but the almost, or basically femme fatale and some other small-time hood dude wants him back into the crime world so they can do some sort of job. They don't really get involved in what it is, but they do seem to hint at it being higher stakes and being able to set them for life. And his answer to that is no, but the girl is overhearing this because she spotted him doing his honest job, and she overhears this conversation, and she starts to walk away. And I thought, when, you know, they ask him this, and I thought they were going to do the cliche thing of, oh, she misunderstands it and she doesn't see him turning it down, but they don't do that, and she does hear him basically turn it down and be honest and stuff. And I like that they avoided that cliche, which is, for me, very annoying. It's very lazy. And I will say, in terms of style with this one, I know later, I think when I was reading about these films and then kind of remembering Good Morning a little bit, I think I remember this a bit more. I don't know what point he started doing this more, but I know at least after the war he was doing this, where he became a very kind of minimalist director with long shots, long static shots. And in this one, you're not really seeing that. It's much more conventional in terms of what you would see from an American director or most other directors. And there is actually motion in the camera and stuff. But I will say he does do some interesting stuff with that. But I think it's evident that one thing that's interesting, seeing this early work from him, this wasn't his first film by any means, but it was a very early one, is that it does seem like he's still learning how to make a film, and he's still trying to find his own voice, and so he's experimenting with stuff, which I find very interesting, just in terms of the evolution of a director.
One thing I found really interesting is just the way that he framed a lot of the shots, where he would focus on like the hands or the feet, not so much the faces.
Yeah, he really likes feet in this. I think in the first two, at least, he really likes feet.
Yeah, a lot of feet. And, I mean, if you ever took like a basic photography class, you've probably like learned how you're supposed to frame things, where you're supposed to put the face in the center and all that stuff. And it just goes so contrary to what we traditionally have seen or been told is the right way to compose a shot. And yet he accomplishes so much by not focusing on the faces, because I feel like there's a scene in the elevator particularly I'm thinking of, where the gangster girl and the boss are kind of scheming together, and we do see their faces at the very beginning, but as the elevator goes up and they're talking, all we see is their feet kind of shifting up and down and almost like dance motion, which is why I mentioned West Side Story, because there's some very like rhythmic things happening in this movie, even though it's not a musical. But the shiftiness of the feet and the fact that they, kind of are expressing themselves not just through their faces, but through their whole bodies and their movements is interesting. And it's a theme that I think we'll see carried through in the other Ozu movies that we're seeing. There's another shot that I really liked that, again, was striking because of what it left out. And that's a scene where Kenji takes his girlfriend on a date to the river, to a little picnic, because he accidentally interrupted a picnic that they had earlier in the movie that she and her sister and mother were having. So he takes her to the river, and the little sister is sitting in the car and playing with some balloons or something. And then you see Kenji and the girl seated along the river, and there's a giant Buddha statue behind them, but it cuts off the head of the Buddha, so all you're seeing is like the bottom half. And I thought most cinematographers or most directors would probably make sure that you could see the whole majestic thing. But I love that it's so focused on these two and the intimacy between them that's building, that it almost doesn't care what's in the background. You know what I mean? It's so much more focused on the human interaction.
I remember when I was preparing for the podcast we did on the childhood films, like you mentioned, where we were talking about Good Morning and that one. A special feature on the Criterion's edition of Good Morning was a guy doing a video essay about Ozu and his style and stuff. And he talked about how, I can't remember all of the details of it, but he was talking about how I think Ozu tends to like to have, at least especially by that point, but I think you can even see it here too, of liking having a camera lower, almost from a child's point of view and stuff. And I don't think Ozu wasn't I think one to really explain why he was doing something, or if he did, it wasn't much. Like, he didn't say, oh, it's because I'm shooting things from a child's point of view. So we don't know if he did it for that reason, or if it was just because he liked having the camera down there. But I think and I think, again, you could see that in this one, where he does have the camera lower than you would expect it to. Like, there was one shot in the last film we'll talk about where they have a shot of a woman and her husband, and the woman is in frame. You can see all of her face, but the husband, most of his face is cut off, which you normally wouldn't do. Usually you would put the camera a little bit higher so both their faces are in frame. But he seems to like doing that, and I think a benefit to that, especially when their shots in the homes of families and stuff, is that you do get, at least I get the sense of almost being, the camera is almost another person in the room, and they're observing the goings on in these people's lives and stuff. And I think that can also be applied to the scene you just mentioned with them at the picnic. So I think it does have a point of view to it that I think really fits in with Ozu and the mood he likes to create, and again, the stories he likes to tell, especially later in his career.
One thing that I thought was really interesting watching these three movies is that he was only 27 when he made these first two,
wow.
so only 28 by the time he made all three, and yet, you know, he has such a grasp of family life and kind of the inner struggles or inner balance of these people that he's making the movie about. And I'm sure he got some of that from his own experience of growing up in a family of, I think he had 5 siblings all together, and they weren't super well off. Like his dad was a fertilizer salesperson or something. So he probably did have some financial struggles as well. But it's just interesting how insightful this seems. And I'm thinking, like, I'm 40 and I don't think I could make Walk Cheerfully. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's such a humanist movie, and all three of these really are. And to have a young man be able to make something that is, for lack of a better term, just so unself-centered, right? Because usually we see, especially early work of directors, being more biographical. And this doesn't really feel that way. It feels like he's opening up, you know, or pulling a curtain back on what society was like at the time.
Yeah, I think I do know that for the third film, I think it is based off of stories of someone or other. So I think some of that script is coming from the experiences of a particular person. But yeah, like you said, he does seem to have a lot of insight into not just family dynamics, which of course he could have had experience with, but just the fact that, like you said, that he has such an insight into life in general. It seems like he should be much older than he is. And I think, I mean, we'll see as we hopefully get more into more of these films in future episodes, but I think it helps, or I think it would be maybe telling that in later films, I know at least when he gets to stuff like Tokyo Story and some of his later films, I do think they tend to involve older generations. Each seems to involve older generations more. So which maybe I wonder if it was just because he was older so he could more accurately depict those generations and how their relations are with people. But yeah, just very insightful, which I think is one of the reasons why I like him so much. And there's other elements of his stuff and the stories he likes to tell that we're getting more into, especially with the last story that we tell. But yeah, he has a great point of view even this early.
And I mean, I know he made movies before this, right? But I'm just looking at his filmography. It looks like most of the films he made up to this point are lost. He had one that has been fully preserved, Student Romance Days of Youth. And then he had a short film called A Straightforward Boy. But other than that, this is the first fully surviving film of his. And he had only been making films for about 3 years previous. So, yeah, he accomplished a lot in a short amount of time. And if you look at his filmography, it is quite impressive, you know, the prolific nature. I mean, you think, you know, filmmakers today can crank them out. This guy was making so many movies in such a short amount of time. I mean, in 1930 alone, he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like 8 movies. So it's really just incredible. And I don't know if all of them were of great quality, because some of them, like I said, are lost. But the ones that we do have are pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, part of that with the earlier ones is probably just due to the nature of, I mean, silent films. They tend to be cranked out a bit quicker. But even when he was getting to sound films and his output was slowing down a little bit, it was still a film every year or two. When we get into the war years, that changes for obvious reasons. But for the most part, yeah, he was more. I kind of think of him, as you were talking. I was kind of thinking he's almost like a Richard Linklater type guy who managed to do these small little films, and because of the nature of them, is able to do a lot of them, and is able to do them fairly often. There's really, for the most part, not a long break between any of them.
So I wanted to touch briefly on the acting in this movie, because I actually thought that it was pretty outstanding. Again, sometimes in silent films you see people tend to overact, but I thought that these actors were fairly subtle. So Minoru Takada and Hiroku Kawasaki are the two leads, and I thought both of them really did a great job. Particularly Minoru Takada, I thought was just a really phenomenal actor and good at capturing, you know, on his face the emotions and the transformation that this guy is going through. So that was really enjoyable to watch. And I also really enjoyed the relationship between himself and his sort of closest gangster friend, who is, I wondered if he's supposed to be maybe a little bit more attached than just friendship there. It is somewhat ambiguous, and there's rumor that Ozu himself may have been gay because he never married and he
Okay.
was kicked out of school for writing to a male student. So unclear, right? History hasn't made that 100% clear, but I was wondering if there's anything more to that relationship between those two men than is really explicitly laid out on screen.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I'm not an expert in Japanese like society and their norms and stuff, but I thought they were, at least in certain cases, and maybe I'm getting this confused with some aspects of Chinese culture, but I thought they were a bit more reserved in certain aspects. So not just in this film between the two characters you mentioned, but some of the other ones, they are more physical than I would maybe expect them to be. Especially in this film, there is a lot of, I think you might touch the guy, they touched each other's cheeks at some point or whatever. They do this intimate stuff that would be, I think, odd in most cultures in 1930 for particularly two guys to be doing. So I wouldn't
Yeah,
be
I think they
surprised.
held hands at one point too and like
Yeah.
wipe each other's tears, and it's
Hmm.
a very intimate relationship whatever the nature of it is, which is refreshing to see, especially in an older film.
On a point you were kind of mentioning, I do think Ozu is, at least in the films that we've seen of his, Good Morning and then these three films, I think he's particularly good at casting actors for his films. And for this film, I think he's kept up with that. If they ever really fail, it's really, again, it's not really their fault. It's really, again, down to something I was kind of talking about earlier. It's just a scripting thing. I don't think their material is always up to what they are capable of doing. And some stuff gets let down because like I think the romance, for example, between the guy and the girl would be more effective at certain aspects if we saw a bit more of it. Like there's one line that the woman has of she's in the car with him or something, and she says basically that she's so happy that she's found him because she can be herself around him and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The problem I found with that, really at that point, I think at any point in the film, even after that line, is that I never really got to see that. Like she's telling us that she's herself around him, but we don't really get to see. I mean, she's not terribly comfortable at work, I suppose, but I don't really see that as the same thing. And so I don't really get that connection and maybe feel for them as much because I'm just being told that she's more of herself instead of seeing them interact and her being comfortable and having a good time with him and stuff like that. So in some senses, I think, at least in this early film, I think he tells a bit too much in a way that is detrimental to the relationships that he's trying to portray. Okay, so his next film is called, that we're going to be talking about anyway, is called That Night's Wife, or at least the English title is. This is a shorter film. The other two films we're talking about are more around 90 minutes. This is a much shorter one. It's about 65 minutes, so much more of a breezy watch. And it's basically about a guy who has a sick daughter at home, who, I forget if they mentioned what exactly she has, but she's not doing terribly well, and they need money for her medical care so they can more guarantee that she will come out of this okay. She's like a little girl of, oh god, probably 5 or younger, just around toddler age, I guess. And the mother is taking care of the daughter at home, keeping watch over her and stuff. And the father has tried to basically have a stick up or whatever, hold up, whatever, and try to rob some people at some sort of building. I forget what the business is. So he can get some money to help pay for her medical care. And the police get onto him, and they start chasing him. He gets away and does get back home, but one of the officers does track him down, and there was a bit of some drama at their house while they're trying to make sure the daughter gets through the night okay. So this one, I will say, is much more in line with what I would have expected when I was first reading about this Eclipse series of the 3 crime dramas that Criterion released. It is a darker story. That certainly is. There's, I don't think, any humor in it, and it's darker in terms of cinematography and much more of a dramatic tale than the other one is and stuff. Again, not a lot of like crime type stuff in it. It's mainly the thing at the beginning and then the repercussions of that for this guy who's trying to help his daughter. But again, in terms of tone, this one's much more of what I would have expected, and I did like that. And I like seeing Ozu do some darker stuff with it. And what I find interesting about both of these crime dramas, we'll see if it's the same for the third one when we eventually talk about that one. But is that despite the fact that he's doing crime stories, he's still very focused on relationships. In terms of the first one, relationships between the guy and the girl, and then the relationships between the guy and his friend. And this one, it's the relationship between the guy and his wife, and the guy and his daughter. And I found that very interesting. And there's almost hints of, and what I thought the story was going to go into was almost maybe the shades of gray that can be present in crime, especially crimes of this nature and stuff. But for me, again, I feel bad saying this, I was a bit let down by this one because I felt like there wasn't quite enough of material or story there for me to be satisfied with it. I just didn't feel like he was saying much with this one. I liked, again, the style of it and the basic premise of it, but I didn't feel like Ozu was really sane enough to justify the film being there despite positives.
Interesting. So I really like this one. This was definitely my favorite of the three. And to me, I liked that it starts out feeling like it's going to be almost like a film noir, and then it veers into this sort of melodrama aspect with the family, because I didn't know what to expect. I tried to not read about it ahead of time. And so, you see this pretty violent seeming, I mean, you don't see anybody get killed, but you see people tied up, and you see kind of the faces of the terrified workers at whatever this place is that the man robs, and all we're seeing is the top of his face because he has like a bandana on. And so for all we know, he's just a sinister crook. And then, as he is on the run and it flashes back to this room where the mother is dealing with her sick daughter and the doctor, we start to slowly realize the gravity of why he's done what he's done, and that it is an act of desperation. So I really liked that metamorphosis of kind of shifting what we thought it was going to be into what it actually becomes. And I also really enjoyed how much tension there still is when all the main characters are in one room for the majority of the movie's runtime, even though it's a short film. Having the policeman who posed as a cab driver show up, right as we think the guy's made a clean getaway and he's home and giving his wife the money and checking in on the daughter. And then, of course, they hear the knock at the door. I thought it was a really good setup because we really don't know where it's going to go. There's the question of, is the cop going to let him go because he sees what's happening, or is the mom or dad going to do something even more desperate to the cop potentially? So there's a lot going on, even though, again, all the action's kind of taking place in one static setting, and it becomes a lot more about, the human psyche and what people will do when they're in these difficult circumstances.
Yeah, and I have seen some people talk about some of the things that you do about it being kind of psychological and stuff. But no, I do, again, I like the idea of having all the characters, like you said, primarily in one room and stuff, and the claustrophobia of that and the tension of that. I guess for me, there just wasn't. There was certainly some tension there, but I don't think he maybe, for me, Ozu, I don't think he maybe milks that tension as much as I would want. And maybe I needed a few more scenes to really kind of take advantage of that tension and of what exactly is going to happen, if somebody's going to get hurt or killed or something. There was potential there that I just felt was not used as much as I was hoping. Again, I certainly like certain aspects of this one. I just wish there was more done with some of the elements of it.
Yeah. I liked where it ends up, which I won't reveal for people that want to see it fresh, but I did like where it ends up. I thought some of the closing scenes and shots were particularly moving and beautiful. And I also was just very touched by the whole scenario. And, maybe it's because I have young relatives that are around that age, and the little girl was just so cute. And I was like, what's going to happen? They better not do anything bad to this little child. So I was very caught up in the story. I definitely felt like it had much higher stakes than Walk Cheerfully, for example. So I found myself responding emotionally to it, whereas even the next movie that we're going to talk about, I didn't quite get as connected to it as I did this one. This one, we're just thrust right into it right away, and we, are kind of questioning, like, what would we do if we were in this circumstance? And there's also that great phone call that we see between the lead character and the doctor, where he's on the run from the cops, but he takes the time to like duck into a phone booth and duck down and call the hospital, see how his daughter's doing. So I loved those little moments that really made this stand out from your ordinary crime drama.
Both of these people, the father and the mother, don't really want to hurt anybody with what they're doing. They just really want to make sure their daughter is going to turn out okay. So there's a lot of complexity to that I really enjoyed. So I guess if Ozu is about family dynamics and family relationships and all that sort of stuff, this one kind of shows the lengths that parents will go sometimes just to make sure that their children end up okay.
Yeah, it's really kind of a universal story in that sense. And I believe it's based on, from what I was reading, it's based on a story by an American writer named Oscar Skizgal, who wrote for Reader's Digest and Saturday Evening Post and Collier's and things like that. So it's actually an American originated story, which again, there pops up, Ozu's interest in Western culture. But I think the fact that he could translate it to these Japanese characters in this time period just shows that he was, again, really good with creating empathy and being able to translate emotions that transcend the culture or transcend the, language of origin or whatever the case might be, because it's a silent film. So again, so much of it is communicated just through looks or through body language. And even the way that he stages some of these scenes, like it opens, and it's a rare, I would say, at least from what I've seen, a rare Ozu shot of it's from very far away. We're seeing a much bigger kind of bit of the city, and there's a man smoking in front of a large building. And so it's less focused on the human, but then it quickly narrows into the human aspects of the story and how, it kind of transforms from that feeling of we're all just kind of cogs in this bigger machine, or us kind of against the industrialized world. It really all comes back to caring for the child and like what your ethical responsibilities are in that case, right? So I loved the way that it kind of tackles those moral dilemmas. The last thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned in this movie is just how powerful and how incredible the female character is. The wife, Mayumi, played by Amiko Yagumo, she just plays it with such confidence, and she's able to switch from that loving, doting mother to that strong character that's willing to do whatever it's going to take to keep her family safe. And I loved seeing that in a movie of this time period. I think, it doesn't even seem like she hesitates when she sees the opportunity to grab a gun and point it at a person that's threatening her family. She doesn't even think twice. And I loved seeing that depicted, and I thought she did it very believably.
No, I agree with you, and I think, and to add to that, I think one of the nice things about her character is, again, touching back on something else I had said earlier, was that she, despite the fact that she is being tough at certain points and is holding a gun, at the cop and all that stuff, it's still very evident that she doesn't want it to get ugly or whatever, and neither of these people want things to get ugly. It's just, they want things to turn out as well as possible. I mean, she is possibly willing to shoot somebody and possibly kill somebody and make sure her daughter ends up okay, but she certainly doesn't want it to be like that. So her sympathy stays with them because it is something that she doesn't really want to happen. So I think that's important too. We don't lose the humanity of these characters despite the fact that they might have to make some tough decisions. But I think Ozu, again, is at least in the films I've seen of his, does seem to be sympathetic towards, isn't just against the male sex, but the female sex as well.
Yeah, I think out of these three, this is the one I would recommend people seek out the most. It's not at all funny like some of the others are, but it's a great example, I think, of his ability to convey emotion with very limited action. And I think that that's, something that we'll probably come to see later on in his other work.
Yeah, he tends to take not that this situation is necessarily small, but a simple premise or a small premise and make a complex film out of it.
So So the third movie that we watched for this was Tokyo Chorus, which came out in 1931. And this one is definitely more on the comedic side, although it still has elements of drama as well. But it starts off in a decidedly comic direction where we see some drill students that are outside and being kind of inspected by their teacher. And they seem like, they're not exactly all that upstanding or don't seem to care as much about what's going on as their teacher does, for sure. So he's kind of straightening their, uniforms and trying to get them to stand up in line. And then one guy comes late and he's not fully dressed. He's kind of like scratching around and making weird faces and just basically being the class clown, it seems like. And at one point he takes his shirt off and he's, just the laughing stock, and everybody's enjoying it except for his teacher. And then we see the movie says, several years later or whatever, and we see that he's now a married father, and he has 3 kids, a little boy and a little girl and a baby. I think the baby's a girl as well. And I will say that these kids are a little bit brattier than the ones we've seen in the other movies. I'm just throwing that out there. But some kids are. In this case, he's about to get his yearly bonus at work, and his son really wants a bicycle, and his daughter wants stuff, and his wife is, just telling the kids that their father will take care of it. He's getting his bonus, and the kids are obviously already kind of like playing their parents off of each other and have sibling rivalries going on. And so anyway, well, Dad goes to work, and this whole sequence actually I thought was really funny and really effective, of them, like all the workers waiting in line to get their bonus, but they don't know how much it's going to be, and they're all secretly trying to like peek in the envelope but not reveal to the other people how much they got. And the best part of that was when there's a sequence where a bunch of different ones of them secretly go into the bathroom to try to secretly look at how much money they got, but that doesn't go as planned either. And I won't spoil all of it, but I just thought that was a hilarious sequence. Well, unfortunately, the main character is called to defend another coworker who's getting fired for something he thinks isn't fair. So he argues with the boss and ends up losing his job too. And this is what kind of leads into the rest of the movie, which is still comic in tone at times, but it's definitely dealing with more serious issues of, economic struggle and trying to keep the family afloat and having to, kind of humiliate yourself trying to go through different odd jobs or look for work. And we definitely get the sense that it's humiliating, but also that the mother and the father are kind of willing to do what it takes to care for their children, even though said children are, I would say, somewhat ungrateful little butts at times. It should be mentioned that the 2 leads in this movie are also the same people that were in That Night's Wife. So you have Tokuhiko Okada and Amiku Yagumo in this movie, and then various little kids as well. But I'm curious what your thoughts were on this one. I think, if I remember looking at Letterboxd correctly, I think that you liked this one the best out of the 3. Is that true?
I did. I was curious how much you see my Letterboxd before. I try not to look at yours, but
well,
that's fine.
I usually try not to, but I just happened to be on here logging it. You were the only other person in my friends that has seen it, so I saw your ratings automatically.
Yeah.
But I'm curious why you liked this the best out of the 3.
So so to kind of counterbalance it's a bit of my bah humbug about the other 2 films, this one was my favorite out of the 3 that we're talking about, and partially that might be because it is more directly in line with Ozu's strengths and the things that I do like about him. Because again, it is about a family. Again, it does have more of a comedic bent in certain respects, but like you said, it is very dramatic. Well, not very dramatic, but it does lean towards drama a lot too. And what I liked about it a lot, and there's a lot of things I liked about it, but I guess first off I will say one of the things I liked about it was the ability of Ozu to capture the complexities of the family dynamics, but also and the complexities of emotions just within a certain moment or scene. Like, there's a moment where in order to pay, again, we have a child who I think is a bit sick at one point, and I think in order to eventually, when she, spoiler alert, comes out okay from it, they're at home, and the father at one point, when the daughter was still not doing well, was like, well, I'll find a way to pay for it and whatever, even though the fact that he doesn't have a job at this point. And when they get home, the mother finds out that he sold most of her kimonos to help pay for the medical bills. And she finds this out while the father is doing some sort of clapping game with the son and the older daughter, and they're just trying to, he's just trying to have fun with them and do some cheery, smiley stuff. And she gets kind of upset by that, and she's initially she kind of joins in with the game, but just kind of sad about it, but then tries to be a bit more cheerful with it for the kids, but then there's still some sadness in her face and stuff, and then goes back to happiness again. So there's this element of trying to be happy that the daughter that turned out okay, and just trying to have fun, even despite that bit of drama and the fact that they're on hard times financially, but then sadness that they had to sell some stuff, but then also trying to put on a brave face for their children, and also maybe even finding a bit of joy in that tough moment. So there's all these things going on in this not that long scene that Ozu is able to capture just perfectly, and there's those kind of moments I think throughout the film, and I love those a lot.
I loved moments about this, but I will say I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum from you in that this was actually my least favorite of the three.
Mm.
And I'm still trying to wrestle with why exactly that is, but I feel like I could never quite figure out the tone of the movie. And normally I'm pretty good to just kind of go with the flow, but I felt like this one was really episodic and it didn't sustain the same like tone all the way through, and it just kind of left me feeling tossed around. So I probably need to see it again. And full disclosure, I mean, I feel like I'm not in the best of moods to watch a movie like this today. I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, as my mom likes to say. So I maybe just need to see it again. I wasn't as primed for something comedic that was also dealing with more heavy themes, but yeah, I wanted to like it. I think the problem for me starts with the kids, because they were just, especially the little boy, he's like kind of bratty and ungrateful, and his dad is like working really hard to get him, his bicycle, and then he can't afford that because of course he lost a job, so then he gets him a scooter, and the kid like throws a fit about it, which is realistic. Like, a kid probably would be upset that they didn't get the bike they wanted, but I was like, come on, kid, like, don't be a brat, like, your dad is working hard. And I don't know. I just I couldn't really have a lot of sympathy for the kids. And then, the kid is like smirking when he breaks his dad's records. And I don't know. Like, I had a really hard time empathizing with that little boy. So that was probably where the problem started. And then I don't know. It didn't quite connect for me.
Well, first I'll say on the tone issue, I hope you like it. If you go back to this film, I hope you more maybe mesh with it. For me, I don't really agree that it was all over the place again. I think it shows... I remember a discussion I had in a film class once about... it was some French film from the new wave of the 50s and 60s and stuff, where they were talking about... It might have been the 400 Blows. I can't quite remember. But there was a scene with a kid and their father, I think the father or something, and something dramatic happens. They have a dramatic conversation that's really serious or something, but then the kid, the father, and the mother go in a car to like a movie or something, and they're all cheerful, and something funny happens and stuff. And the discussion we had was, again, kind of what I was talking about earlier, where you have these complexities of emotions where situations can very easily sometimes in life go from comedy, something that's very dramatic, to something that's funny, even almost unintentionally so. Like, there was one time when my stepdad wasn't doing well health-wise, and I had to get him ready to go to the hospital, and there was this kind of funny moment where he was downstairs and I was upstairs trying to find his coat or something, and almost like this Abbott and Costello vaudeville routine came up where he was trying to communicate to me where his coat was, and I just wasn't getting it, and there's just all this communication stuff. So in this serious moment, there was something funny coming out of it. Or I would say another film that's much more recent, in Manchester by the Sea, which is a very serious movie about dealing with the funeral of a certain character. But even in this very serious movie, there's a scene where two characters are outside on the East Coast during the winter, and they're freezing and they can't get to their car, and that's kind of funny. So I think in serious moments you can have things go to comedy, and vice versa. It's funny moments and happy moments can go to drama. So I think for all that, all those transitions worked for me, and I think they were all pretty true to life. I mean, obviously some stuff is a bit enhanced, like the gag you mentioned with the money in the bathroom and stuff is a bit movie-like, but I think it works and stuff, and it's funny and humorous and all that stuff. So for me, that worked fine. In terms of the kid, particularly the boy, yes, he was a bit bratty. I will say, having a child, um, uh, I think my daughter is mostly better than this kid in this movie was. But kids can be. I mean, just thinking back to, I was flashing back to particular moments I had as a child where I was being just a little. Ugh, during Christmas, and we can, I think kids, we can get hyper focused on certain things, and we don't always realize the seriousness of certain things, whether it be somebody losing a job or whatever, and we're still very selfish about our own needs and all that stuff. So, I mean, there was an element of the most thing I was less concerned about. I was a bit concerned about the fact that the kid was being a bit of a brat, but I saw that as kids are sometimes brats and stuff like that, especially when there was something he really, 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 really wanted, and his father basically promised that he wasn't. The father, reluctantly, I think almost just can't get for his son at that point. And there's some sadness there where the father can't give his son something that he really wants. But I was partially more concerned with just making sure that the parents dealt with that brattiness appropriately and
Mm-hmm.
weren't rewarding it or whatever, which I think they deal with it mostly fine. The kid kind of gets what he wants, but I think in a way that kind of works with it. But at the same time, the father, I think, continually is trying to tell the kid, trying to get the kid to calm down, show him that, maybe the scooter could be fun and stuff, and does that multiple times. Even when he's getting mad, he goes back to like trying to make the situation positive and stuff like that. So I think, this parent-child relationships are very complicated, especially with young kids like this and stuff, and you can get very frustrated with them. But for me, at least as a point of view of a parent, I was kind of more okay with that. And I think for this film in particular, it's a kind of okay to have. I think maybe why we see that more in this film than the other films that include kids, especially with That Night's Wife, is that these two films, even though obviously That Night's Wife is very much about what these parents would do for their child, it's not really about the relationship with them or the kid's relationship with them in the same sense. Tokyo, of course, is much more about the family dynamics and how those two generations interact with each other. So I think it's more appropriate and likely that we would see that sort of negative behavior from the kids, because it's more about that and how the kids are reacting to the financial struggles too, which is not, they don't maybe necessarily see the greater scope of it, but they certainly aren't happy with it either, and you can see how kids react to that sort of stuff too. So yeah, I meshed with that, I think, more than better than you did with it, I guess.
Well, you've definitely convinced me I need to see it again because I probably was just not in the right mode. Because the things I loved were the more like comedic moments,
Mm-hmm.
like that early scene, as I mentioned in the boss's office at work, and all the bonuses. Like I would have loved more of that, but I have to also come to terms with the fact that that's not really the kind of filmmaker that Ozu is. He is more interested in the family dynamics and the more like realistic scenarios. So I think that's probably on me, and I do think the actors again do a fine job. It just wasn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily what I was in the right mood for. So probably not the movie's fault. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that was on me, but I still enjoyed some of the scenarios. In particular, I really enjoyed something towards the end of the film where the lead character comes back into contact with his old teacher, the guy with the mustache who's now older and is running a restaurant. And that scenario again had some really funny kind of comedic moments where you see the menu and like the flyer for this restaurant and it says something like calorie cafe, our portions won't leave you hungry or something like that, which is like hilarious. I mean, it's not very good advertising, although I do kind of want to go there. And they're all dusty and like it's definitely like a little bit more not slapstick, but it's a little bit more on that like silly side, and I really enjoyed that and meshed with that. That's probably more what I was gravitating towards in this movie were those funnier moments.
I will say something that was probably unintentional. I'm sure it was totally unintentionally comedic. I just found it funny. Was the movie had probably my favorite title card from any silent film, where you have the scene between the father and the mother, and then there's a time cut, and there's an intertitle that says 4 or 5 days later. And I found that really funny because I'm like, do you not know? You're the omniscient intertitle narrator. How are you
Yeah.
confused by this? So I found that really funny, again, unintentionally. But yeah, there certainly are funny. But one moment that was kind of comedic, it was the one you mentioned where the kid, not intentionally, but accidentally, is trying to get something like a ball from the top of a shelf, and he accidentally jostles the shelf, and some of the dad's records fall down, and they're fine And then the dad puts them up, and he's trying to do something, and then they fall down again. That time they break.
That's true. That was Dad's fault. That's a good point.
And which is kind of a bit of a funny thing. But the thing I liked about that was almost, I guess I don't know if this is even funny, but there was a little moment with the kid where he picks up one half of one of the broken records and just puts his eye through the little hole where the thing would go and stuff, which I found really cool because that's something that people would do, especially kids and stuff.
Yeah.
So I found that just a nice little, I don't know if that was the kid's idea or Ozu's idea or whose idea that was, but it was a nice, just subtle little background touch that I liked and stuff. So yeah, there's lighter moments and just subtle moments that I really love in the movie. One thing I got more frustrated with than the kid in this movie was the wife at one point, where the guy is having to do basically he's trying to help out this restaurant guy in the hopes that the restaurant guy he says he knows some people that can help him get a better job. In the meantime, he's helping the guy at the restaurant, the guy and his wife at the restaurant. And he's at one point they're trying to advertise the restaurant, and they're going down handing out flyers and they're holding banners. And the father is doing this, which he doesn't really want to do, but he's trying to do it just help make ends meet because it's something. And the wife is out with her kids on a train or bus or something, and she, without the dad knowing it, sees him doing this, and she finds it very humiliating and like, why would he do this? I never asked him to stoop to this level and stuff. And I got frustrated with her because it was just like, well, it's something. He doesn't have a job. You have no income coming in. Like, it's something at least. I mean, yes, it's not maybe the most ideal thing. I mean, he says he's even college educated, so maybe it's not the most ideal thing, but it's something. So I found that just interesting in terms of, especially we're still dealing with that now in terms of kind of looking down at certain job positions and stuff like that and seeing them as lower things. So I don't know if that's really a sign of the times or if it's an element of Japanese culture in terms of honor and stuff. Obviously you have that samurai type thing in there from older times and stuff like that, but having that element of honor and stuff maybe is more particular to Japanese culture, especially of that time. So in all three films you have elements of that, is what's an honorable thing to do, what's an honorable response to a situation, or an honorable job to have and stuff like that. So I found that kind of interesting at the same time as it being a bit frustrating, that I wanted to kind of shake this wife and just kind of tell her just like let him make money at least somehow, and then you at least have something. Why does it matter what it is?
Well, I actually interpreted that moment a little bit differently. I thought she was sort of empathizing with the fact that he's taken this job that is like so far beneath him, and she says, I never wanted that for you. I think she just feels horrible that he's having to go through this to provide for the family, but maybe I misinterpreted.
And maybe I did too. Or maybe it's an up to interpretation, but
I think throughout the movie you see these two as a couple like teaming up and trying to help each other and be on the same page and help their kids, and they might have different approaches to the parenting or how to bring money in, but it seemed like they were mostly unified in their approach. Like, even when she finds out he sold her kimonos, she ends up being okay with it because ultimately, like, it provided for the kids and especially their sick child. So I don't know. I felt like, especially the way that the movie ends and the note that it ends on, I sort of interpreted it more as she's wishing more for her husband and she wants him to be able to do what he wants to do instead of just seeing him like basically the equivalent of a sign spinner would be today.
Yeah, and I think that is certainly possible. And I think back to what you're saying about, they do have some arguments sometimes in the film, but I do love the relationship because it does start out usually with nothing against her or anything, but there was an element of hostility from her character, understandably, through certain things that the husband is doing. But she kind of gets out of frustrations, and then I think internally it's just like, okay, how can we make the situation good and better? And decides that, one, he usually has a good point, and that, okay, let's try to help support him in what he's trying to do and stuff. So the frustrations that would come out of those situations, naturally come out of those situations, are there and believable, but there's still this element of, like you said, of support and of what you see in any good relationship of friendship and stuff, where they want the best for each other. So they are husband and wife, but they are a friend to the other one when they most need it, which I think is a great thing to see in that relationship, and something I don't think is always present in relationships in films. Okay, so to talk about some upcoming releases, or some new releases from some of these boutique labels. One that we haven't talked much about, and we haven't featured a film of theirs on here yet, though I know we will in the future at some point, is Classic Flicks. Again, I've mentioned them before, but it's Classic and then LIX. They are doing, I've mentioned in the past that they have been doing some Little Rascal volumes lately. There's a new one of those that is being released, I believe, when was the date of that? This is volume 4 of their sets. It's being, it should be released as this comes out. The date for it was January 18th. And then my continuing mention of Warner Archive is continuing with their Blu-ray releases of the Thin Man series. This latest one is the Song of the Thin Man, which is also coming out in January, along with the film that an Alfred Hitchcock film, Stage Fright.
Well, I have a few that I'm looking forward to that have been recently announced. So the first one that I'm going to mention comes from 88 Films, and this is a deluxe collector's edition of the 1991 movie Black Cat, starring Jade Young, Simon Yam, and Thomas Lamb. And this one is coming out on January 31st. So this was kind of a precursor to movies like Kill Bill and The Villainous. Mm-hmm. And basically, you know, if you have a female badass martial arts movie, this movie probably was an inspiration to it. And it is something that I haven't seen, but I've been very excited to watch because it's kind of along the same lines of like La Femme Nikita and other movies where, you know, you just have a very striking female protagonist. And this one definitely looks incredible. And the release itself looks like it's going to be really beautiful with some cool special features. So there's going to be some new interviews, some audio commentaries, as well as a poster and a 40-page book, some lobby cards. So there's all kinds of stuff that come with this. And I'm definitely excited to get my hands on it. So again, that's coming out on January 31st. The next one is actually a movie that I have on DVD, but I'm excited for the Blu-ray, and that is Blank Generation. This one is going to be released by Dark Force Entertainment, which I'm not super familiar with, but it looks like a cool release. So this one stars Richard Hell and Carol Bouquet, and it's directed by Uli Lamel. And this was kind of a punk rock movie, as you might guess, probably from the title and from who's in it. It came out in 1980 originally, and the basic storyline is that Nada, who is a French journalist, is on assignment in New York, and she's working with an up-and-coming rock star, punk rock star, of course played by Richard Hell. And then she enters into a relationship with him, and she has to decide if she's going to stick with it or if she's going to go back to her former lover, who's another journalist who's trying to track down Andy Warhol. So definitely a cool kind of punk rock movie. I'm excited to get this on Blu-ray when it comes out. And then the last one I'll talk about comes from Scream Factory or Shout Factory, and that is a release of the movie Lipstick, which came out in 1976. And this is starring Mariel Hemingway, Chris Sarandon, Perry King, and Margot Hemingway. And this one is going to be coming out on February 15th. And this one is about a fashion model who is assaulted, and she's also failed by the legal system, so she has to try to figure out how she's going to get her revenge. And it's definitely a movie I'm curious about, but I have not yet seen, so I can't speak to its quality, but it certainly looks interesting. And I like the tagline on the front cover. It says, "Lipstick. It isn't always an invitation to a kiss." Mm-hmm. So I love movies that have striking taglines, and this one just looks super up my alley, so I'm excited to check it out.
Some stuff that we have coming up in the next 3 months for the podcast. In the past, I know we've mentioned that for particularly Black History Month and for Pride Month, we tend not to want to do them if we can't get a guest who can accurately give the point of view of those topics that we just don't have. But I was talking with Rosalie, and I think we both feel that it would be inappropriate if we didn't do something for February. Despite the fact that we weren't able to get a guest for it, it would be inappropriate if we didn't do something in February for Sidney Poitier, given his recent passing as of this recording, and the fact that his birthday was in February. And again, it is Black History Month. We just think it would be appropriate to talk about some films of his, considering how important he was to film culture and the representation of black people in films. We haven't fully picked the films that we're going to talk about of his. I think we've landed on, we will talk about Raisin in the Sun, which is a Criterion film, and then we're either going to talk about, we're going to talk about two films. We're either going to talk about, for the other one, Lilies of the Field or Paris Blues. And then in March, we're going to be talking about adult animated films, and we're going to be talking about Perfect Blue and Heavy Traffic. And then for April, we're going to take a trip out of the boutique world so that we can talk about an actor who I think both Rosalie and I are very fond of, Brendan Fraser. I say outside the boutique world, and we'll get more into this when we get to that episode, but I don't think any of his films have really been released in a boutique label format, so we're actually gonna go out of what we normally would to talk about him. But those are the things that we have coming up over the next few months. In the meantime, you can check out our parent company website at 25yearslatersite.com. Its Twitter account, its main Twitter account at 25YL Media. It is also taking divergent paths into various Twitter accounts and different, I believe websites in general deal with different topics like sports and horror and television and all that stuff. And I do know it has some additional Twitter accounts for that. One is at Horror Obsessive. Another one is at Sports Obsessive. Then we have at Film Obsessive, at TV Obsessive, and at Music Obsessive. So a similar title for each of those. And then if you're interested in some of my stuff, you can find my Twitter account and link to my YouTube channel at CinemaPackRat.
And you can find me on Twitter at Rosalie Lewis. I also write for fthismovie.com. And I recently appeared on the Cult Movies podcast hosted by Anthony King to talk about the movie Pandora's Box.
We will see you guys next month where we'll be talking about the great and late Sidney Poitier. So we'll see you then.